how do you start learning a language from scratch? And why is the starting phase such a delicate process in the overall language learning process? I mean, your approach, if I understood you correctly, is the following. You are having the native text, right? And you're still an absolute beginner and you're trying to translate the native text into your own language, into Italian.
Yes, yes, I have the target. I have actually a bilingual resource, meaning I have the text in, say, German, the target language that I'm
Right.
learning, and I have it in Italian so that I can compare the two systems. And then I do this back and forth translation. So I make sure that first I understand it and then I absorb it. So to answer your question, how do I learn a language from scratch? I have to say that my strategy hasn't changed that much in the course of the years, but it has. I refined it.
Right.
So first of all, I use this technique, meaning that if somebody asks me how do you learn a language from scratch, first of all, my first piece of advice would be get hold of a language series that you like on the market. Now, one other important thing to say is that the language series that you use is important, obviously, because if you like the material, it's a plus. But I also have to add that you have to learn how to use it, because books, like the books that you see here, for example, they're books and they're pieces of something, but you have to absorb the content if you want them to be useful, because
Right.
books were written for you to not only to understand them. Some books were written for not only to enjoy them, like romances, but also to help you acquire an ability, like a manual. So first of all, learn how to choose material, and I'm just not talking about searching on the internet, but also if you go to a library, you leaf through a book and you see if you like it visually, for example. This is
Right.
one of the very first things that meets the eye, as they say. And then obviously you have to learn you have to figure out the best way to use it, to make the best out of it. So this is the very first step that I take. And the second step, and this is like a refinement that happened in the last 5 years, is that I find myself a language partner as soon as possible.
Right.
So, the search for the quest for to find a language partner is also important, because I think that nobody has really ever learned a language totally by themselves, just with books. What happens is that they have to interact with human beings, and when you interact with human beings, that's the moment when your language skills actually take off. People go to a foreign country. The reason why a lot of them, even if not all of them, speak a language well, it's because they are forced, in a way, since they live in an environment, they're forced to speak the language on a daily basis. So if you don't have the chance to live in a foreign country, you still have the internet. The internet is a treasure trove. It's absolutely amazing what you can do with the internet. So what you should do is go to some language sites where you can find language partners. A couple of names come to mind. For example, SheerTalk is very famous, as well as conversationexchange.com. And you can actually select the male, female, age, target language, native tongue, so for an exchange, and then and then you just send an email, a message, and you say, hey, I'm Luca. I want to learn this language. I'm a beginner, intermediate. I would really like to talk to you. And then it's very easy, because a lot of people actually do reply. And then you just start having conversations on Skype. But once again, it is important to know how to have conversations on Skype for the sake of language learning.
Right. Okay. So to wrap this up, so in order to start learning a language from scratch, three things are important. First of all, to identify a textbook or a language series that that is suitable for you. Yeah. My question is, how do I know that? Because for instance, I'm an absolute beginner, right, in the language. How do I know that this particular textbook is the right one for me?
There's a couple of things. For example, as I said before, the very first aspect is the visual aspect. If I don't like a book visually, and that happens obviously, I'm not willing to use it first.
Right. Okay.
Second, for me, it's important that the book For example, it has to have a bilingual version of, it has to have your target language as well as your native tongue or another language. It doesn't have to be your native tongue. It can
Right.
be also, it can also be, for example, a language that I know quite well. I've learned quite a few languages through French and English because there was no version in Italian. So this is the other important thing. And then for me, it's important that the book is not too charged with overloaded with grammar, meaning that to me it's important to have some grammar notes along the way, along the path, but it doesn't have to hinge on grammar. It has to be on communication and conversation. Third, fourth, it's important to have some kind of phonetics in it, meaning that, for example, Asimo, which is one of the series that I like the best, has some explanations. For example, they add the stress to stress patterns to sentences. Stress patterns are, for those who doesn't for those who don't know what stress means, is that some words in every language, especially in English, French, Italian, they're stressed in a way because they convey more information. If I say, for example, say Italy is a great country, you will have Italy is a great country. You will have Italy and country that are higher in pitch. They're stressed because they are the important elements of the sentence. So it's not just the stress and the main stress of words, but also the stressed syllables within words, because every word in English, in French, in Italian, they have some parts of the words that are stressed. You know, they have an accent. The accent falls on certain syllables. And Asimo provides that, as well as other features. So another very important thing for me, because I do care about pronunciation and intonation, is the idea that they give you the tools to figure out the phonetic patterns of a language.
All right. Okay. Mm-hmm.
And possibly even vocabulary, but I don't like vocabulary lists, but there's a lot of people who like them. So if it also has vocabulary lists, that's a plus for a lot of people. For me, it's okay. And there's another thing that I wanted to add. Asimo has an amazing feature that is not much discussed that much. Together with the main dialogue, you also have an exercise after the dialogue in which they assemble the words, the pieces together in a different way than the main dialogue. So you learned some words within the context of a dialogue, of a conversation, and then you can actually see how these words are used in different contexts and different sentences. And this is quite important because it relates to what I was saying before. It's not so much as learning words, pretty important, but also how to assemble them together,
Right.
which is one of the main features to build the so-called language core.
Okay, got it. All right, let's move on to the next question. Learning a language, or especially learning a language in the beginning, takes a lot of time, right? And I think most of the people, they fail in maintaining a daily language routine. And one of your core principles that you preach, so to speak, is to learn a language, a foreign language, every single day, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how can people do that, right? How can people learn a language every single day or maintain a language learning routine if they're working full time, or if they're studying full time? And there are also other things in life, such as doing sports, meeting friends, and so forth. How can we pack language learning into that crowded schedule?
Well, I would say that modern times have given us beautiful things, for example, the internet, but they've also given us the curse of a life that is in constant. We are constantly in a hurry.
Right.
Life is so much faster than before. Well, I would say that no matter what method you use, because the method is important, but there are some cognitive principles that are extremely important. The first and foremost, I would say that the most important principle is stick to your routine every single day. Now, as you said before, this is might sound a little bit trite, but learning every day gives us the possibility of feeding our own brains. Now, the problem is, as you said before, that a lot of people don't stick to it because they don't have the time. Now, when you learn a foreign language, first you have to ask yourself, and this is all, it has to do with motivation, routine, it's all entangled, it's all one thing.
Right.
First, ask yourself a very important question: why am I learning this language? If you start with a kind of feeble motivation, if your motivation is not as strong and your motives, your goals are kind of fuzzy and vague, then within 3 4 weeks, even if you start with a lot of energy, it will wane with time very quickly. And I think that happened to quite a lot of us and in general to language learners.
Right.
Another very important thing, so first ask yourself the right questions. Why am I learning this language? Then you have to keep recalling, keep telling yourself why you're learning that language. Imagine that with just 30 or 40 minutes a day, what you can accomplish, you can actually learn an ability, acquire an ability that is going to enable you to communicate with thousands and thousands of people around the world. For example, right now, when I think about learning Japanese, sometimes I struggle. Sometimes I tell myself, gosh, this language is difficult. But the idea of, the idea of going to Japan and the idea of talking to people, to millions of people who speak a completely different language, and sometimes, and most of the time, I would say, they don't even speak English. The mind-boggling possibility of communicating with somebody who cannot speak any other language is just very motivating,
Right, right.
Another thing, so asking yourself the right questions at the beginning, and then remind yourself every single day, even if it's at in the back of your mind, that you're doing something that is going to change your life and enrich it and make it much better, is a huge motivation booster.
Okay.
Now, going back to the question that you asked me, how do you do it? How do you establish your routine? Well, there are a few things to say. First, as I said before, we'll start with the right mindset. When people say, I don't have the time, just rephrase it and try to say, I don't make the time. And that would completely change the perspective. Because if you say, I don't make the time, it's not that we don't have the time, it's that we make poor use of it. The reality is that every single day, Stefan, you, me, and everybody else, they do some things during the day that they like, working out, go jogging, watching a movie, watching a YouTube video, whatever. So we actually do make the time to do some things that we like, no matter what happens to us, even if we have a family and, it's a pretty busy life, you have your wife, you have your kids, etc., etc. Reality is that we can actually make the time. When we're talking about language learning routine, we're not talking about 4 hours. Language geeks study, I would call them language geeks, which is not an insult, by the way, they can study for 8 hours, for 4 or 5 hours because they have the time, because they make the time. But a normal person who's interested in one language, they're not studying 3,000 languages, but just one, can actually find 15, 30, 45 minutes. It's not such a crazy amount of time. What I also suggest is, if you think about it, if you have 30 minutes a day, 30, 40, 45 minutes a day, don't just learn a language for 45 minutes a day, but divide it into blocks. You wake up in the morning. Let's suppose that you wake up in the morning at 6:30, okay? If you're an early person or if you have to work. Now, just try to to wake up 15 minutes before, 15 minutes earlier, and then for 15 minutes, you study something. 15 minutes, you might retort, it's not a long time, but in 15 minutes, if you stay focused, you can actually learn a lot, because according to scientific research, small chunks of, when you tackle a piece of information, if that piece of information is not very big, like, for example, reading a book, you can simply read an article, your attention span as well as your concentration is very high, and you tend to retain things much better. So if you have 30 minutes a day or 45 minutes a day, divide it into chunks. 15 minutes in the morning, you wake up a little bit earlier. 15 minutes in the afternoon. Remember that even if you work, you have lunch break. And lunch break, actually, some of my students do that. For example, a lawyer, he's a lawyer, and he does that all the time. Say, okay, lunch break, I'm going to study, I'm going to learn with Luca. And it's 1 hour. So imagine that if you have 15 minutes, you can take in your lunch break, you can not only read an article, for example, this is called extensive reading, read an interesting article, or stick to your language routine when you start learning a language, but you can also eat, which is quite important for the following of the day.
Okay, awesome. So in terms of learning on a daily basis, it's not like learning every day 3 or 4 hours a day because it's not sustainable, right? In long run, it's really to start small, right? For instance, start with 15 minutes a day, right, and make it a habit. I think that's really important, right? So like brushing your teeth every day in the morning and every night before sleeping, you're not thinking about it anymore, right? The same kind of habit, the same kind of mechanism should be developed when it comes to learning a language every single day, and it's really
Yes.
important not to overwhelm yourself, right? With
Yes, and yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. And there's one more thing that I forgot to say is that you not only divide, this 45-minute block in multiple chunks, but you also divide it according to the amount of energy that it requires. Let's now, when we talk about language learning, we have writing, speaking, listening, and reading. If you wake up and you are a morning person and you are fresh in the morning, just try to tackle activities that require a little bit more of energy. For example, producing, like speaking and writing. Obviously, if you don't have anybody to talk to, you can simply talk to the microphone of your iPhone, and you can create a small recording, short recording that you can send to a native speaker. So it's not actually true that we have to have another person to talk to if you want to talk, if you want to produce something, or write a text or whatever.
right.
While you can listen and read when you're tired. For example, you could come back from work and you're pretty tired. You don't want to speak, create speeches or writing, whatever. You can simply listen and read, which are actually much easier sometimes than just speaking and writing.
Yeah.
So it's not just about dividing into smaller chunks because it helps your memory retention as well as attention span is better, etc. But you also have to decide what kind of schedule you want to stick to, and you try to allocate some time to in the morning or when you're fresh. You dedicate some time to activities that require more energy, and that is quite important. And that's what I do, for example, with my bidirectional technique when I have to translate back. So when I translate into Italian, it's kind of easy.
Right.
So I can do it when I'm tired. But when I have to translate into the target language in order to absorb it, it requires more energy and concentration. And I tend to do it in the morning before going to work or before doing anything because it's easier.
All right, okay. So to wrap this up, so the main point that Luca is making is that the energy level throughout the day is not the same equally, right? It's not distributed equally. So for instance, I'm also a morning person and I tend to do the hardest thing in the morning, right? Because then I'm fresh, I'm focused, and then I'm good to go, right? So right after lunch, right, when my belly is full and I'm kind of feeling the lunch fatigue, I don't know, I'm sending emails, I'm calling people, I'm organizing things, right? So mechanical things that do not require a lot of brain power. And then in the end, in the evening, then my energy level is going up again. I'm doing again more challenging work, right? So I think the main lesson we can draw from that is that know your own biorhythm, daily biorhythm, yeah, when it's the sweet time and when it's the downtime during the day, and then allocate those tasks and especially language learning tasks and divide them. Yeah, know yourself what is the most challenging task and allocate them appropriately according to your biorhythm. I think that's really important. Yeah.
Wonderful recap.